So good morning, and may we have a Shavua Tov. Our hero for today is Rav Yaakov Yechiel Weinberg, better known as the author of the Three-Day Esh, and one of the most important rabbis and halachic decisors of poskim of the last generation, and especially in the modern Orthodox world. Although, as we will see, I hope that we'll speak about him in this session and in Yirtzeh Hashem next week. He was not necessarily at home with no definition as modern Orthodox or as yeshivish or as any other definition. As a matter of fact, he has a wonderful biography written by Mark Shapiro, which some of you may know. Yeah, and the biography is called Between Worlds, the Modern Orthodoxy and Lithuanian Yeshivot, which is a nice way, I think, to summarize, no, not to summarize his life, but to give us a sense of the question that he was facing throughout all of his existence, throughout all of his life. And just to make it more clear, he begins, Professor Shapiro begins, and we would follow him with from the end, meaning from the description of his Levaya. So if you would look at the source page, which I will also share on the Zoom. So the first source is from a newspaper, that's a Chiloni newspaper that was in Eretz Israel. It was called Davar. It was a leftist newspaper back in the day, and the date is the day after, or 2 days after the passing of Rav Weinberg. So that's the 27th of January, 1966. 1966, so almost, 60 years ago, 58. It's already 59. Time passes, yes. הלווייתו של הרב יחיאל ויינברג, שנפטר בשוויץ, so the לוויה of רב יחיאל יעקב ויינברג, who passed away at Switzerland, וארונו הוא טס לארץ. And he had his aron, that was the basket, right? Coffin, yeah, the casket or the coffin, flew to Eretz Israel. התקיימה אתמול אחר הצהריים בירושלים. So the Levaya took place yesterday at the afternoon on ירושלים. ללוויה נתלוותה מחלוקת. So the Levaya was accompanied by a dispute. שבעקבותיה, following this מחלוקת, הובא הרב לקבורות בבית העלמין שעל הר המנוחות. So the Rav was buried in the cemetery on הר המנוחות, במקום, instead of בית הקברות שבשכונת סנהדריה, where he was supposed to be buried and where a grave was already dug. So there was a grave ready and open, prepared for him, and nonetheless, in the last minutes, we will see in a second, he was taken to be buried in הר המנוחות. Instead of סנהדריה, לשם היו פני הלוויה מועדות, where the levaya was originally heading. מסע הלוויות יצא מבית החולים שערי צדק. So the levaya began from the hospital שערי צדק, אשר בחצרו נאספו קהל רב של רבנים, ראשי ישיבות, תלמידי חכמים, אנשי רוח וציבור, קהל רב מתושבי הבירה. So it was a big levaya, many attended, חשוב people, important people, רבנים, community leaders, state leaders. בין המלווים נראו נשיא המדינה. So Mr. זלמן שזר was the Israel president of the time. שר הדתות, the Ministry of Religions, דוקטור זרח ורהפטיג. שר הפנים, מר חט שפירא, so that's, he was also from the מפד"ל. שר הסעד, דוקטור יוסף בורג, also from מפד"ל. הרבנים הראשיים, the chief rabbis, ואישי ציבור רבים. So a very important לוויה, almost a national לוויה, almost a ממלכתי לוויה. הארון שנישא בידי תלמידי I cannot even read here. But the Aaron was carried by students of yeshivot. יצא דרך רחוב גשר החיים אל מכונית החבר'ה קדישא, so it was brought to the car in order to drive him to Sanhedria, because it's a way to go. אולם כאן נעמדו מספר בחורי ישיבה, וכמה מתלמידיו ומוקיריו של המנוח, ומנעו את הכנסת הארון למכונית. But here some yeshiva students stood up and said that the Aron should not be taken to the car, because the minhag is to respect someone that was a very chashuv niftar, and you carry him all the way on your shoulders. So they asked, or even insisted, that the casket would not be put into a car, but would be carried on shoulders. בטענה כי לפי מנהג ירושלים יש לעלות מת מקרב גדולי התורה רק ברגל, so he must be carried by foot. לאחר דין ודברים קצרים, after a short discussion, הסכימו המלווים להמשיך את מסע הלוויה ברגל לעבר בית הקברות בסנהדריה. So still the destination is Sanhedria, but instead of driving, we would be walking. But now that the yeshiva students were the ones to carry the bed, אולם בקצה הרחוב, at the end of the street, נעצר מסע ההלוויה על ידי מספר רבנים, ובהם, so the levaya was again stopped by a few rabbis, and including, and in the head, הרב סרנה, רב יחזקאל סרנה, בעזרת השם, I hope that you'll be able to speak about him, a very important rabbi, ראש ישיבת חברון, עם ראשי ישיבות אחרות. Hebron, of course, was not in Hebron in 1966. Israel did not control Hebron, but also the yeshiva of Slabodka, which went to Hebron, left Hebron in 1929 in Praot Tarpat, and it moved to where we know it today in Givat Mordechai in Yerushalayim. So Rav Serna stands there, וציוו על נושאי הארון לפנות מן המסלול ולהסתובב לכיוון בית הקברות שעל הר המנוחות. So Rav Serna, with the other ראשי ישיבה, argued that they must change course and go to הר המנוחות instead to Sanhedria, where, as I said, the grave was already made. הם טענו, what was the argument? כי הרב המנוח צריך להיקבר בחלקת גדולי התורה. So they said that because the Sridiesh was a great rabbi, Rabbi Yaakov Weinberg was a great rabbi, he should be buried in the plot near other, his neighbors should be other גדולי התורה. By that they obviously meant חרדים גדולי התורה, because in Sanhedria, that need to be said, mostly the Mizrahi Rabbanim would be buried. And they wanted to take him to Har HaMenuchot, where the Brisker Rav, the Belzer Rebbe, the head of Yeshivat Mir, where Rabbi Yaakov Weinberg studied for a time, ואחרים. גם כאן פרצו חילוקי דעות ליד הארון. So that caused, as you can imagine, that caused a large disputation. אולם מסע הלוויה המשיך בדרכו לפי מצוות הרבנים, ובניגוד למסלול שנקבע מראש על ידי שר הדתות ושר הפנים. So the Mizrahi politicians have lost in the arguments with the Bachur Yeshiva, which seemingly pre-planned it. When they asked to carry the bed by the shoulder, they already prepared, so they would be in control of the Levaya, which is amazing to think about. According to Mark Shapira, and he heard it from someone that told him that. So, you know, we need to take it with a grain of salt. But he said that, I think he said that I can't remember, maybe, or either Burg or Shapira, argued and said to Rav Serna that the grave is already made. So Rav Serna told them that if they want, they can use it. But the Rav Yaakov Weinberg is going to Har HaMenuchot. So when they reached בית היתומים דיסקין, במבואות שכונת גבעת שאול, then the people of the חבר'ה קדישא, already of the Prushim, meaning of the Haredim, already waited there. Again, it seems that the whole thing was pre-arranged and pre-planned, and they took the bed from the people of the חבר'ה קדישא of Sanhedria, and they buried him in הר המנוחות according to the will of גדולי התורה לדבריהם. So the newspaper ends with according to them. Yes. That's an excellent question. So Rav Yaakov Yechiel Weinberg, as we will see, was married only for 16 years and had no children. So he had no immediate family to have or not to have a saying in the matter, which is an important part of the story you're going to tell. But what we can see here is exactly this sense of living in both worlds, but also in neither one of them. And this picture of the different factions of the Jewish orthodoxy fighting over his bed, where it should go, is tragic on one hand. On the other hand, you can say that he was greater than this dispute. So the people that are more narrow-minded, then they need to define him. He should go to a drawer, either this drawer or that drawer. But they are just people that defy the concept of drawers. They are larger than that. And then there are students who try to pull them into the drawer that they live in. And that's another way to see what happened there with Rav Weinberg. But now, after beginning from the end, let's begin from the beginning. ברוך אתה, אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם, שהכל נהיה בדברו. So, Rav Weinberg was born as Yechiel Yaakov in a mid, you may say, a mid-size Jewish village called Czechnovich in Poland. Back then it was part of the Russian Empire in 1884. 1884. And he was the oldest of at least 6 siblings. We are not sure how many siblings were born. He kept in touch in his older age, we know, with a sister and a brother that survived, but we know that there were at least a few more from letters and from, again, Shapiro made a very well researched. I highly recommend the biography. It's anyone that ever heard him, by the way, he is fascinating. He speaks, he seems to know everything under the sun. Mark Shapiro. It's beautiful to listen to him. Sometimes he's going on digestions, but just because he knows so much. I highly recommend the book, and also it is now, I don't get any revenue, but there is a sale now. It's being published by the Littman publisher house through Magnus, and they sell it, I think, in 40-something shekels. This is for an English book of that size. That it's nothing. It's like $10. It's ridiculous. So you can buy it there. Also, if you prefer, there is also a Kindle edition, which would cost you more. But there is also a Kindle edition that is available through Amazon. I highly recommend. I think it's a fascinating book, written very, very clearly. Everything is translated. Really a beautiful book, and I wouldn't say that each footnote, but many of the footnotes are like books to themselves. Also very fascinating, very important, interesting facts. Okay, so returning to us, so he made the whole research, he looked into the registry of births, etc., and he says that at least 6 siblings were born. And it's very difficult to know if maybe there were more, how many survived to what age, but that's basically the family. Now, his family is very far removed from your typical rabbinical family. They were religious in what we call today, I mean, they kept Torah and mitzvot. It seems that his grandfather was a Cantonist, meaning someone that was enlisted forcibly to the Russian army and only released in a much later age. These people usually, even if they wanted to keep Yahadut, were very uninformed in Torah and mitzvot. His father maybe also served in the Russian army. That's a fact that is not clear. Anyhow, when he was born, people that were in the Russian army usually would not have children during the army service. That's not the type of army that they render.
It was 25 years.
And it was for 25 years, yeah, exactly. So it took, but you were not enlisted in age of 20. You were enlisted in the age of 13. So it's
yes, they were still in Jewish.
Yeah, it's the Cantonese. It's in itself, again, that could have been a whole story to us. I think we told it here once or twice. As the bottom line is that his parents, while traditional and maybe also respective of Torah and Torah learners, were not themselves the stuff that usually produce Torah great people, and that may had a large impact on the continuation of the career, we may say, of Rabbi Yechiel Yaakov Weinberg. Anyhow, he was born. He was a prodigy. He was a genius, recognized from a very young age. So his father sent him to a cheder, as all Jewish boys were sent to chadarim, and he was told by the Rebbe of the cheder, what you have here is something that is very unique, and you must press forward with his education. And his father decided to go on with it, which was very unusual. Because usually, if your father was not a rabbi himself, or at least a Talmid Chacham, then he would say, I prefer another hands in the store or in my work than him just going and study some obscure Torah that who knows when would produce a revenue. So that was very unusual, but his father sent him to yeshiva. So in 1900, when he was 16, he leaves home and comes to Grodno. There is a large Bet Midrash there, and he is recognized, as I said, as a very smart, very outstanding young man, and he is already giving shiurim. There was a balagulot shul, balagula, wagon driver. So, Baal Agala. So, a wagon driver, and that's the most simple, you may say, the most simple occupation in the Jewish folklore. And he was giving shiurim in that shul, and he was even paid. And Shapiro has the exact amount that he was. Again, the birth of what he knows is just fascinating. So he has even how much he was paid. Anyhow, he was there only for 1 year because obviously there was no Rav there that could really advance his learning. He was teaching there, but a boy 16 years old needs to still keep learning and not to be teaching. So he continued to look for furthering his education in Torah. And in 1901, he comes to the Slavodka Yeshiva, an experience that would impact him through the rest of his life. So Slavodka back then was back in Slavodka. It's before, obviously, Slavodka came to Hebron. So Slavodka is in Slavodka, and one of, it's very difficult here to give the title. Its leading figure, who is not the Rosh Yeshiva, is the alter of Slobodka. That is Rab Natan Tzvi Finkel. Now, he's not the Rosh Yeshiva because he wanted a Lamdan to be the Rosh Yeshiva while he was the Mashgiach. And Rab Natan Tzvi Finkel was a student of Reb Israel Salanter, and he was one of the most important advances of the Musar movement, about which we spoke last year. So he was advancing the teachings of Musar, which meant it's not enough just to sit and learn Gemara, 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 Gemara. That is the traditional Lithuanian way. You also must work directly on your midot, on your character, on your virtues. Otherwise, Torah alone would not suffice. For some in Lithuanian world, that was epikosi. To say that Torah alone is not enough, that is epikosi. In Wolozin, they blocked anyone that tried to enter with the ideas of Musar because they said medicine is only needed to those who are sick. Those who are healthy do not need to take medicines. So that was in Wolozin, that was part of the Lithuanian world, but in some areas of the Lithuanian world, then Musar really took part, and Slobodka, as I said, was created and established for that purpose. And we have Rav Weinberg wrote in Hesped, he gave about one of the great rabbis of Slobodka, he wrote about his own experiences coming as a 17 years old boy into Slobodka. So look at source bet. כאשר נכנסתי לישיבת סלבודקה, when I entered to the סלבודקה ישיבה, ואני עודני נער, and I was still a young boy, 17 years old, עמדה ישיבה במרום גדולתה, the yeshiva was at its zenith, at the high of its peak, לאחר סגירת וולוזין על ידי מלכות הרשעה של הצאר הרוסי, ירשה סלבודקה את מקומה. After Volozhin was closed, if you remember last week, we spoke about Rav Meir Bar Ilan and the closing of the Volozhin yeshiva. So as they say, the disaster of one is the fortune of someone else. So the closure of Volozhin sent all the good Bachurim to somewhere else. And at least Rav Weinberg believes that the other place was Slobodka. I would secretly tell you that some other yeshiva thought that they were the ones to which all the good Bachurim came. But that's the way of the world. Anyhow, obviously there were hundreds of students in Slobodka. And, they do not, the Bachurim do not pay. This was before the time that parents pay. So how would the yeshiva exist? That's exactly what the administrative manager asked the Rosh Yeshiva, the Mashgiach, asked Rav Finkel. He asked him, מאין יבוא לחמם של מות, how can I feed hundreds of students? The Saba, the alter, Rav Finkel, answered, לא ניתנה תורה אלא לאוכלי מן. In the desert, the Torah was given, how everyone was fed? From heaven. The same thing would work here. So obviously that would just meant that now the administrative manager had to go among the houses of the village and collect. ובאמת כאן היה, that's how it was, כל אחד קיבל את חלקו בפת, 2 ליטראות לחם ביום. So there was some amount, I don't know what is 2 ליטראות, 2 liters, some amount, obviously not great, and not a big amount of bread, and that was what every student would get. That's the food for the day. On Shabbat, they would eat by the Bali Batim and get some meat, if the Baal Bait had meat. We have to remember that the Jews, many of them were poor. ואף הסבא בכבודו ובעצמו התפרנס מפת קיבר זה. The alter himself, Rav Finkel himself, also ate only this same amount of bread in order to share with his students. As I entered the yeshiva, he continues, היא הייתה מלאה מפה אל פה. The yeshiva was packed, hundreds of students. הצפיפות של הספסלים והעמודים, it was all crowded, the chairs, the standers. הייתה מפילה לנכנס חרדה ואימה גדולה שלא נראתה כמותה בישיבה אחרת. You just in awe when you saw all of this crowding. לפעמים הוצרכו 3-4 בחורים לעמוד צפופים יחד כדי להניח את גמרותיהם על טפח אחד של עמוד אחד. So sometimes 4 guys would use one stander. Now, I'm not sure if that's an exaggeration or that's or it's literally to be taken literally. Obviously, but it was packed. ובכל זאת איש לא התלונן לומר צר לי המקום. But no one complained and said that the room is too narrow. Here, of course, he rephrases what the Mishnah says, that in Yerushalayim, when everyone came לעלייה לרגל, came to the holidays, and also it was crowded, but the miracle was not that it was not crowded, it was that no one complained. That I heard from Rav Lichtenstein, from my own Rosh Yeshiva. When people complained on Yom Kippur, Baruch Hashem, many people come from outside of the yeshiva to share in the tefillot of Yom Kippur. So some of the students came to complain why they are being moved from the regular places, etc. And he told them, the miracle was not that there was room, it was crowded. The miracle is that Jews did not complain. Okay. איש לא יתרנן לומר, צר לי המקום, כל אחד שמח בחלקו להיות אחד מן החבורה הקדושה. Everyone was excited just to be part of what is going on, of this holy society of ישיבה בחורים. ביום כניסתו אל הישיבה קבע לו כל אחד את מקומו בספסל ובעמוד. The day he entered the yeshiva, everyone took a place, and that was his place from now to the rest of his years in the yeshiva. Be it a year, 2 years, 5 years, the day you entered, you find a vacant place, and that would be your place for the rest. That meant that there was no ordering according to age or according to knowledge. Each one, it was random. The first vacant place you found, you sit in. And that created a type of a democracy that characterized these Lithuanian yeshivot. And that led to a feeling of meritocracy, meaning that it doesn't matter where did you come from, it matters what you do. But Rav Weinberg says all of that was correct regarding all of the yeshiva. But there was also in Slobodka, there was the Mizrach, the eastern wall. There were chairs near the eastern walls. And there you couldn't just come and sit. The Saba, the altar, would choose who the students that would sit there. And there were two criteria. One is learning, how great you were in learning in Atmada. And the second was Musar, because it's a yeshiva of Musar, it's a Musar yeshiva. So only someone that was great in that or in that, and preferably in both, would be able to sit in the Mizrach. So that was a way of the altar to point the Talmidim that he wants everyone to follow. And as you can imagine, in a short time, Rav Weinberg became, he says in his memoir, like a son to Rav Finkel. So he became not only a good student, someone that is outstanding, but a very personal relationship were created between him and the altar. And he says that he took care of him like a father. Now, here I add something of my own. So just take it as a speculation, a psychological speculation. But again, we have to remember that he's coming from a house in which the father is not necessarily an example for Torah learning or for anything. I mean, again, a nice Jew, for sure. But nothing special that can be a role model for someone that aspires now to maybe be one of the greatest Talmidei Chachamim of the next generation. So the Saba, I think the altar wanted to become like the role model for him. Now we have to understand that the altar of Slobodka had a very, how would I say, personal method, maybe even at least a somewhat pressing method of education. He believed in pikuach. How would you say pikuach? Observation. That everything must be under the control of the rabbi. Now, we speak here about someone that is already 17, 18, 19. He's not a little boy anymore. And he has some attraction to the new literature, the new Hebrew literature, what is called Haskalah. Now, Haskalah is a very wide word. It can contain many, many, many things. But in that area and that era, it mainly consisted of the Hebrew new literature. Barijevsky, other authors like that, Maskilim, which the religious standing were not necessarily what Rav Finkel saw as appropriate for someone that he is hoping to raise as the gadol of the next generation. So the Saba of Slobodka made great efforts to uproot the tendencies of Haskalah from his young student. And that was done sometimes in ways that I think that we today would not necessarily appreciate positively. So for example, the Saba sent as a roommate to the young Yechiel Yaakov Weinberg, a nice guy. But after a few days, Rav Weinberg understood that the nice guy was actually a spy for the Saba, and the young guy that his roommate would go to the altar and every few days would give a report on what is going on in the personal room of Yechiel Yaakov Weinberg. So you can imagine, so it's very complicated because on one hand, he really saw him as a father figure. But on the other hand, he felt oppressed. He didn't want to be oppressed. Also, it seems that the other students were taunting him for being in such a close relationship with the altar. And again, we can understand that in such environments, young boys can sometimes be less sensitive, maybe, than what we would have wanted them to be. And also, there were disputes there. The question of Musar was not quite clear. Some students opposed the Musar movement at all, or at least they opposed the way that it was applied in Slobodka, and they couldn't attack the altar himself, so a soft target was the yeah, the son is not really the son, there was a real son, the סלבודקה altar, but this Ben Zekunim, right, this Yosef to Yaakov Avinu of that was Rabbi Yechiel Yaakov Weinberg. After 2 years, he is being sent by the altar to Mir to establish the yeshiva of Mir, very well known to this day, again, not in Mir, but in Yerushalayim. But that was its beginning. Now, why was he sent after only 2.5 years? All of the reasons above. The Saba wanted maybe to give him a mission, so we would feel that he is doing something and would not be again get attracted to external literature. Also, Rabbi Yechiel Yaakov Weinberg wanted to run away from these other students that were oppressing him. And also he wanted to become a little more independent. So it seemed to be a good move for everyone. However, after a year in Mir, he decided to go to a few months vacation just in order to learn some Russian, because he felt that it would be very important for him to know the Russian language. Of course, not chas v'chela in order to read anything that is asur, but because he explained to the altar that he rode on a train, and how do you call the mevaker, the conductor. So the conductor asked him, he asked the conductor if that is the place where he should go, where he should get off the train, and the conductor said da. And da in Yiddish means, I hope that I remember correctly, in Yiddish it means yes, but in Russian it means no, or something of that.
Russian means yes.
Russian means yes, so in Yiddish it meant no. So he understood that no, but really the conductor meant yes, or the other way around. Anyhow, he got off on the wrong station, and then he was beaten by some anti-Semite thugs that were there. So he told the altar, I felt the need to learn Russian, and that's why I am leaving for a few months in order to learn Russian. Now, the altar, I don't think that he bought the explanation. Maybe the explanation was correct, I don't know. But the altar did not buy the explanation, and when he saw that he is not able to make him, to לשכנע, or my English is, to influence him, thank you, to influence him to leave and to go back to the yeshiva, he sent no other than the saintly Chafetz Chaim. He was already nearing 70. He told him, I have the next Gdolata, and he is derailing. We must save him immediately. And Chafetz Chaim held Rav Finkel in such a high esteem that he agreed to waste his time, right, which was very, 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 very important. He was extremely, Chafetz Chaim was very, very highly regarded at that time. So when he suddenly approached the young Yechiel Yaakov Yechiel, and told him, go back to the yeshiva, then Yaakov Yechiel accepted this judgment, again left the field of studying Russian, at least for the time, and he is back to Mir. That was in 1904. In 1906, he is getting ordained. He is, after a few years in the yeshiva system, he is already teaching, and it's time to get married. Now, again, we have to, nowadays it sounds very foreign what I'm going to say. But back then it seemed very simple that who would be responsible for the marriage? The altar. Right? He is his father. Of course, it was done with the agreement of his parents. And the way that it was arranged, there was a city, again, a mid-sized city named Pilavishki. I'm slaughtering the name. Pilavishki, Filavashka, something like that. Pilavishki. I would call it Pilavishki from now on. And there was a rabbi there, Rav Levin, and the Rav passed away. So now there was a vacancy on the rabbinical throne. And he passed away, leaving behind a daughter 16 years old. So it makes sense. You need to get married, right? You are 1906, so you are 22. She is 16, which deemed back then, more or less, it was appropriate. And you would marry her. The drowery, the nedunya, would be the rabbanut. Excellent for everyone. His parents were thrilled, right? The investment paid off. We sent him to yeshiva. It seemed like a hole out of the yard. But here, he's getting a very nice stella, and he would be paid nicely, and everything would be excellent. Yechiel Yaakov, the young Yechiel Yaakov, Rav Yechiel Yaakov already, had reservations. He seemed to sense that the bride is not what he is looking for. She was, that's how Shapiro is training. That's how I would follow him here. She was the daughter of a rabbi, but she came from a very simple background in the sense that she didn't know too much, like any other 16 years old girl back then. It was nothing unique about her, but he was already in somewhat of a different place. He read some of the new literature. What he looked for in marriage was something other than just a marriage of convenience, in which you will marry her and it would be nice and she would take care of what there need to be care, you take care and you'd become a Rav and everything would be excellent. That's not what he was looking for. His ideas were much more similar to what I believe our model today of what marriage should look like. And it was a disaster. He was not able to stop the marriage. We have to understand, again, he was 22 years old, and maybe we can think that he was supposed to be independent. However, it was very difficult to refuse to the altar. I think we understand it now. The altar was a very, very strong personality. And this young man was dependent. This young man was dependent. And his parents also encouraged it. So he had no one to lean on, trying to refute. So he married her. According to the stories, he only lived at her house, I mean, in the new house for a few days before he left in order to sleep in the local Bet Midrash. And this marriage went on for miserable 16 years. Very, very difficult. It's a tragedy. It's really a tragedy. It's in a way a tragedy of the modern world meeting the traditional world, and there is a lack of communication, even of understanding what the needs are. I don't think that the altar wanted, of course, he didn't want his student to be miserable. He wanted to give him the best that he could. And his parents, of course, wanted to give him the best that they could, but they didn't even understand what his needs were. That's a tragedy. Anyhow, he gets into fight with his parents because of that. Again, we know our knowledge is very, very partial. And also some of that, I think it should be partial. I don't think that we need to go into all of the personal details. Just what we need to know in order to understand his later years. So there was some type, I would guess that he couldn't really fight with the altar. So in a way, everything was directed against his parents, with whom he couldn't speak for some time because of that sad situation. He tried to suggest divorce to his newly married wife, but she vehemently refused, and also her family. And also he understood that divorcing her would, of course, he would not stay in the city after he divorced the daughter of the Rav for whom he received the rabbinate. So obviously he would be expelled from the city, and where would he go? After going against the altar, against his parents, divorcing his wife, and being left without a work, where would he go? He has no home. And having no home is part, that's why it's important for me to emphasize this personal stance. Again, not in Chasfri, in order to, we don't want to say any rechilut, but in order to understand, it's because that's a feeling that would accompany him for the rest of his life. In a personal letter that Shapiro is quoting, then he says, Rav Weinberg says that in the letter that he wrote many years later, he said, I couldn't refuse the altar and my parents, and it shattered the course of my life. Now, I'm sure that it was in Yiddish, but that's the English translation that Shapiro gives. It's extremely sad. It's extremely sad. Shattered the course of my life. And he felt that he has no home. Many years later, in Montreal, many years later, after divorce, after World War II, after everything would happen, about what you would speak in Yirtzeh Hashem. And he's in Montreal, and one of his students is getting married. And he is giving a drasha. And he published the drasha in the Sefer, that about which you would speak in Yirtzeh Hashem. And In the drasha he says that the Torah says, על כן יעזוב איש את אביו ואת אמו, ודבק באשתו, והיו לבשר אחד. He says, a man leaves the house of his parents, and he needs to create another home. And if the couple cannot create this new home, then the man who left the home of his parents would continue to wander forever. And you read that, and you cannot, but, and he decided to print it, which is amazing for me. I think, again, maybe it was just a drasha he made up for the occasion, but I cannot believe that he's standing there. Everyone knows his personal history there when he's giving this drasha. It cannot be that it's not at least a glimpse into his personal feelings. A man leaves the home of his parents and he needs to build a new home. And if he cannot build a new home, then he's cursed to continue to wander forever. So that's, as I said, in 1906. Although his personal life are destroyed, in the rabbinate he's doing pretty well. He's, I guess, maybe has a lot of time because he's not dealing with his wife. He lives in the Beit Midrash, giving shiurim, he's writing to the newspapers, which became national articles, and in the articles, he mainly defends the Musar movement, everything that, all the Torah that he got from the Alter, and that makes him famous because he's writing very, very well. For us, I think too sharp. I think it's young. It's premature in a way. Later years, he would write much more nuanced. So that was very premature. However, it's a good language, and he explains the concepts. Attacks very sharply the idea of limudei chol, of secular knowledge. Very interesting, because we know that he was harboring himself desire for secular knowledge, but in these articles, he's attacking them sharply, and especially the idea of limudei chol, of secular knowledge within the yeshivot, which he sees as the promising, the destroying of the yeshivot, and by that the destroying of the Jewish spirits, to that extent. So that is going on for a few years. And then in 1914, he's still married. However, they do not live together. And he goes to Germany in order to get some medical treatment. Now, it is not clear. Shapira believes it's a physical treatment. However, I read in other sources which speaks about maybe he needed a mental treatment, that his situation was becoming worse. And afterwards in his life, it is clear that he had a mental breakdown. So I don't think it is out of the question that was what was going on. We have to, again, walking with this feeling that you have no home. It's something that is to function so long. I think that's what is impressive here. So I'm not surprised at all that he was getting depressed. So he went to Germany in 1914. However, what else happens in 1914 is the outbreak of World War I. And as many, everything happened so quickly and so by surprise that many people were caught outside of home, and you cannot go back from Germany to Russia during the war because these are states that are in a state of war. So he's stuck now in Germany. As, by the way, many other rabbis, one of them very famously is Rav Kook. Rav Kook went for the Agudat Israel convention. And he also got stuck. Then he went to Switzerland, and in the end, he finished. Rav Kook was in England, in Machzikei Hadat. That was Rav Kook. By the way, Rav Weinberg met him there in Germany. Rav Kook gave him, they just met accidentally on the train, and Rav Kook knew his name from all the articles in the newspaper, and Rav Weinberg had no money. He was a young man, more or less, and stuck in Germany. And Rav Kook said, I have the Rabbanut in Yafo, and I am being paid. So I would give you all the money that I have now, and you would go with that. And Rav Weinberg in the beginning opposed, but understood that he has no other choice, and he accepted the money. He himself is writing with gratitude to Rav Kook afterwards, and that's an interesting story. However, as he got stuck in Germany, what in the beginning was an accident, a fate, and begins to become something out of will. When he was in Russia, he vehemently opposed Torah im derech eretz, said you should not never learn limudei chol in yeshiva. A little limudei chol for parnasa if needed, then what must be done cannot be criticized. But beyond that, nothing. And especially not in the yeshivot, nothing. And he comes to Germany. In the beginning, he's shocked by some of what he sees, but he begins to see the advantages of the Torah im derech eretz shita. And it's very interesting looking in his articles during the years, and you see the shift. So from complete opposition into saying it's interesting, but it's good for the German Jews and not for anyone in Eastern Europe, into it's good for the Jews of Germany and maybe also for some Jews of Eastern Europe that are more ready for such a system, and into this is the solution of the Jewish problem in the modern world. And that is more or less where he lands when First World War ends. And also, we have to remember it's a solution to his personal problem. Because if he would be able to get a position of Rabbanut in Germany, that would eventually enable him to undo his ties into everything that's happening, all the sad things that are happening in Russia. And so, in 1920, he begins learning in university in Gießen. Now, why does he need to learn in the university? A, because he's interested in learning in university. But B, if you want to be a Rav in Germany, you must be a Dr. Rabbiner, right? Or Rabbiner doctor. You cannot be just, it doesn't fly. So you need to attend university. He writes a doctorate about the Pshitata. The Pshitata is the Syrian translation to the Bible. So that's an interesting field of study. And by studying that, he is also announcing his following of Rav Hilzheimer Shita and not of Rav Hirsch. And only a few sentences. Torah im derech eretz is what we know is the general method of German Jews, and that is correct. However, there was a big dispute. Rav Hirsch thought that Torah im derech eretz means that Torah itself should never be studied in any scientific method because it's beyond and above, and it's what underlies all of our lives. You look at science through Torah and not on Torah through science. Very, very simplistically, that is the shit of Rav Hirsch. So he opposed the science of Judaism. However, Rav Hilzheimer and his seminary of Rabbanim in Berlin had a very different shita. They said, we need to use the best methods that we can in order to understand the words of God. Also, if we really want to engage the modern world, if we would just try to block our ears and eyes from all of the epikorsut that the scientific method is raising when it's being directed to Torah, then in the second our students would hear Wólozin, Bible criticism, Talmud criticism, they would immediately fall down because we didn't inculcate them, we didn't give them any defense. So from ideal perspective and also from practical perspective, we need to teach Torah also through scientific lens. Not only, also traditional, but also scientific methods. And that's what Weinberg would come to symbolize through the rest of his life. Almost the only surviving rabbi that would support such a shita. Of his caliber, I think the only one. So after studying and getting his doctorate, Shapira says that he didn't officially get his doctorate. He went through all of the process, but they told him that in order to be officially count as a doctor, he needs to give the revised edition. He got almost an A plus or whatever the grade system was there. However, he needed to revise a little and gave it back, and he never took the trouble of doing so. So he was not crowned officially, but everyone from there on accepted him as a doctor. That was in 1923. In 1921, he skipped. After securing his position in Germany, Jewish ward, he went back to Pilivishki and he divorced his wife after, as I said, 16 years of marriage. So she married him when she was 16. So now she is 32. That is not too old, but is pretty old, especially for that time and era. She did remarry, but she never had children. So it's a tragedy for all. So she is not to be, I don't think that she is to be blamed in any way. All of them were victims of the circumstances. But very, very, a very sad story. And he never remarried. He never remarried. It was just, I think the whole experience was just too shattering for him. And he was never able to piece himself back again in order to marry someone. He had suggestions and offers, but he never took any one of them. In 1924, he becomes first a lecturer and then the head of the Bet Midrash of Rabbanim that was established by Itzheimer. Rabbi Itzheimer himself already passed away, and after someone that served there only for a very short time, they choose Rav Weinberg as again, first the lecturer and then the head of the seminary for Rabbanim in Berlin. And let's read, for example, for a second, source Dalet. So this is what he writes in his introduction to Sridei Esh. So that's after the Holocaust. The name Sridei Esh means remnants from the fire. And that's what he writes in the introduction about the seminary that was obviously ceased to exist. So that's also an הספד for the seminary. אי אפשר לרב בימינו להשתמט ולהתכווץ בקרן זווית של חדר לימודיו. ורב in our days, he says, that's in 49, cannot להשתמט. How would you say להשתמט? Cannot draw himself away from his duties. ולהתכווץ, and just make himself little, בקרן זווית, in the corner, sit in the corner of his study room. עליו לעמוד בשער, he must go to the gates. ועליו למצוא נתיב ללב הנוער המתגדל ומתחנך בבתי ספר חילוניים. He says there are secular schools that our boys and girls are being studying at. In Germany, it was very common to send the children to public schools. We need לקרבו ולהכניסו לעולמה הרוחני של תורת היהדות. We need to speak with them. How can we speak with them if all that we are able to say is Baba Metzia? Of course we need to have Baba Metzia. But if that's only we have to say, we have no communication with them. That's so far removed from what he himself was preaching when he was back in Eastern Europe. הוא צריך לדעת את המתרחש סביבו. The Rav must know what happens around. בעולם המדע, in the world of science, והספרות, the world of literature. את זרמי הרוח ההולכים ומתחדשים. The philosophy, which is being the zeitgeist, that is changing from time to time. בלא הכשרה שיטתית. Now, it's not enough to be an autodidact, just read a few books. You need הכשרה, a systematical training. ובלא ידיעת שפת המחשבה המודרנית, without knowing the language. You remember all of the disputations about Russian. Russian is now not the most important. German, of course, is the language in which the most important philosophy is being written. ולא ידיעת שפת המחשבה המודרנית לא יוכל למצוא את הנתיב ואת המגע הנפשי לעולמו הפנימי של הנוער ובני הדור החדש. You would not be able to find the path to the internal world of the new generation. לאמיתו של דבר ולמרות שמו הרשמי לא רצה הגאון רבי עזריאל היטצהיימר ז"ל ליצור מוסד מיוחד לרבנים. It was called a seminar, a rabbinical seminar, but it was not really a rabbinical seminar. He didn't want to produce only rabbanim. He wanted to produce intelligentsia, religious intelligentsia. And the failure of Yahadut was caused because there were not enough people that were able to combine religious intelligence. No, we speak today about the theory of multiple intelligences, right? So,
the doctor now.
Religious intelligence and secular intelligence, being able to combine them both, scientific. כי כל אנשי האינטליגנציה של אז היו כולם בלתי דתיים. והם גינו את החרדים והלשינו עליהם כעל מורדי אור מחוסרי תרבות. הגאונים של אז שישבו על כיסאות הרבנות בערים הגדולות התבודדו בארבע אמות של ההלכה ויצרו באמת גדולות ונפלאות בשדה התורה. So you the people of science which were great in science and the people of Torah which were great in Torah, but there was no communication. The people of Torah only created in the field of Torah, and the people of science scorned the people of Torah.
Are you going to make your way up?
Yeah.
There is a way to mute everyone. I don't see it now. Okay, anyhow. Yeah, let's continue. So he says, we need people like Rav Seadia Gaon, like the Ibn Ezra, like the Rambam, like the Ramban, like Reb Chisda Kaskas. Almost all of them, by the way, part of Rav Seadia Gaon, are descendants of Sephardic Jewry. Right? So he's pointing out to a very specific time and place, and he says this should be our model. This combination of the best that the scientific and cultural world has to offer and the best of what Torah had produced. If we can make people that would be able to combine both, then we'd be able to approach the new generation. So that's what he's trying to achieve. However, as we all know, 1924 and the years later, the years between the war in Germany were years of great, not growth, tzitzah. Yeah, things were upheaval, stirring up. So new ideas, new notions, however, very difficult years to Yahadut. And in just a few things, Berlin was a very, very interesting place. Rav Soloveitchik was in these years in Berlin studying there. The Lubavitcher Rebbe, according to some stories, Chabad Hasidim tell, which are debated. However, they say that Rav Weinberg gave ordination, rabbinical ordination, to the Lubavitcher Rebbe. They say that the Lubavitcher Rebbe came to him, he needed a rabbinical ordination in order to, he needed a formal ordination in order to be able to go into the library of Berlin. Because you needed as a researcher, right? So you needed, you are a learner. So he needed a formal ordination. And he came to Rav Weinberg. Rav Weinberg told him, fine, sit for 2 or 3 years in my seminary, and they'll give you ordination. Of course, the Lubavitcher Rebbe was not interested in sitting for 2 or 3 years in the seminar of Rabbanim. So he said to Rav Weinberg, you choose whatever book you want from your library. I would study it overnight. You would test me on it tomorrow. And if I'm perfect in the exam, give me immediately an ordination. No, the whole thing is a story. I cannot say anything about its truth. It's just a nice story. And Rav Weinberg gives him a contrast, a booklet that he himself wrote as an answer to a very, very complicated question of moving dead bodies from place to place, because in Germany, the government wanted to move some of the cemeteries, and he wrote an answer, a very complicated one, which is so interesting, is ringing, of course, with his own funeral. And he gave him the booklet, which was a thick one. And they say that the Rebbe said for the whole, it was not a Rebbe back then, but Rav Menachem Mendel Schneerson was sitting for the whole night, learning the booklet and writing a sagot. And in one of the Sfarim they published from Rav Schneerson, many years later, he has a whole few pages of hasagot, of commentary and reactions on this booklet of Rav Weinberg. And they say, why would Rav Schneerson spend his time on reading, in the end, an obscure pamphlet by Rav Weinberg? They said that's the reason why he invested so much in it. And of course, he got his ordination. That's the story. True or not, it tells you something, as we say, the different ideas, the different movements that were coming in contact in Berlin, the capital of However, we are 10:06, so I'm, as I said, we'll continue next week. We all know what happens in 1933. 1933, Hitler is power, and Rav Weinberg was not a prophet.
What?
He was one of these German Jews that believed that the Nazis would temper and would quiet after they would rise to power. He even gave interviews to international newspapers
Get the
saying
wheelchair.
that you should not shout so much, your shouting is part of the problem, and if we would all be quiet, then everything would be fine. That's in 1933. We are very far from being able to judge anyone. We are being very far from being judged anyone, and if someone needs a reminder, just think about last year on Simchat Torah. It's very hard to predict the future.
Okay, I'm just.
It's very hard to
bit.
predict.
I just need to put the car
Of
forward
course,
a little
time
bit so
told
that I
him
can
that the Nazis are not going to temper down, but he still couldn't
get the
believe
wheelchair in more easily.
what would happen. What would happen
You're
later?
staying in the back.
Yes.
It's
I think it's easiest.
I can hear. That's it. So even in as late as 1938, he still hoped that not only that he hoped, he still spoke with German Jews and advised them not to leave the country. Now, again, it's he did the best that he could under the circumstances. The best that he could under they really believed, we have to understand, in the German law, state of law, and that in the end there are citizenship rights that will defend them. These type of things. For us, we look back and we say that's ridiculous. But again, think about some of the countries in the world right now and on what Jews are being, to what do they cling, what do they believe in, and are these things that would be able to save them? Chas v'chayil, chas v'shalom. Something like that would reoccur. So that's the first part of our story up to World War II. And in Yirtzeh Hashem, our next shiur next week would begin with Kristallnacht, in which not only glass was shattered, but also the remnant of the faith that people like Weinberg still had in the German culture and the German state. In Yirtzeh Hashem would continue next week.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Have a good week.